You are a judge?
Yes.
Under the building?
Above?
Yeah, above.
Where do you want the judges?
Yeah, you can be right there.
You're a judge, No, it's fine. It's just like a PC debater, so it's like. Yeah, I don't have a thing. I don't know what to say. Oh, sorry. I was using single thing. Yeah, but they were You were negative side. Negative side. Order speaker. Like Lambert. Second. Third. First refutation. Fourth. Your side. Gonzalo. Second. Hamid. Third. Okay.
Arguments related to that, except for generic arguments so,
You
Oh no, but they were questions that I was supposed to.
아직 되지도 않네.
It's correct. R2 is ready. So I'll call everyone to order. And if teams are ready, we'll start the round. I'd like to congratulate both teams to making so far, this far. And I believe that all the rules are pretty clear by this time. So, and let me introduce the adjudicators panel. This wonderful panel, and Lazar from Macedonia. Shane from Ireland, Galway. Tia from USA. Anna from Slovakia. And my name is Sherzad and I'm from Tajikistan. I'll be chairing this round.
That's why I said no.
I can keep it if you give me something.
I think I gave my software meeting.
Are you sure?
We have many phones.
Alright.
My phone is not live.
Alright, so I'll be your timekeeper. This will be 5, 4, 3, 0. Okay, without further ado, I'd like to give the floor to the first affirmative speaker. Let me know when you're ready.
Can I speak here? Egypt 2011. At the hint of a popular uprising, a paranoid dictatorial regime takes every step necessary to suppress the voice of the people. With no regard for whether it is a mother with 2 children to feed, with no regard for whether it is an innocent 10-year-old boy, the dictatorial regime takes every step to crush the rebellion. And not only this, to ensure that people live in the dark, over the course of 4 days, first Twitter is banned, then Facebook, and then the internet altogether. And as an international community that considers ourselves reasonable, that considers itself a responsible international community that is going to stand for human rights, what is the right reaction to this? The answer lies in one simple foreign policy directive: actively circumventing internet censorship. And the policy under which we feel that we will implement this is very simple. Our policy includes principal, financial, and technological support that could assist in circumvention of state-imposed censorship, and this will depend on the severity of the censorship. We would provide proxies which provide an encrypted gateway through which to access blocked content. We would also allow people to access commotion wireless, which is internet with the briefcase, which will allow people to access the internet as well. And we also support the setup of shadow internet and mobile phone networks. We feel that a justified foreign policy is a justified course of action in the realm of geopolitics. Our legitimacy, we feel, is derived from 2 fundamental reasons. Number 1, that we as an international community are returning a fundamental right to the people that we believe has been unjustly taken away from them in repressive regimes. And number 2, that we're encouraging accountability on repressive governments by refusing to cloak any of the potential atrocities behind a veil of secrecy. Now we as an international community have come to a consensus that there are certain fundamental rights that we must always promote. And this includes the right to know. This includes the right to communicate. And we feel, ladies and gentlemen, that, that conventions such as the UDHR and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, signed by 167 countries, all point towards the clarity on what this right constitutes. And that right is your right to freely express yourself. And understand the role of the internet. That the internet is a mere facilitation for this tool. The internet allows you to access these rights. It allows you to exercise these rights, ladies and gentlemen, through 3 main ideas. Number 1, it provides you a free and unrestricted information source. When the government might hide its atrocities behind the internet by blocking the content, but now when people do have access to the internet, they get to know all that the government is doing. Number 2, it allows a free sharing of opinions. If I know that the government is harming me, I am allowed to talk to another individual, ladies and gentlemen, share my atrocities, and even then take a stand against the government if I feel that it is right for me to do so, or right for us to stand for our rights. And number 3, it is an important tool for political organization and mobilization. When we see, ladies and gentlemen, the dictators think that they can do whatever they want with the people and get away with it, the internet acts as a challenge. And the international community does need to give such a challenge to dictatorial regimes because they wrong people. And human rights everywhere are universal. And having established that, let's look at how the international community needs to respond to this attack on certain fundamental freedoms. As a responsible international community, what does the foreign policy comprise of? We understand that the people are wrong. Our foreign policy takes that into account. And a legitimate foreign policy, ladies and gentlemen, allows people getting these rights. And we feel that a legitimate foreign policy, ladies and gentlemen, has always been giving the people rights. When governments, ladies and gentlemen, provide support to people who are being wronged, when the government also gives asylum to individuals, ladies and gentlemen, who may be harmed in a particular country, it does this for a reason. Because its foreign policy is based on the fact that boundaries do not transcend human rights. And we feel this is a strong principle that any legitimate foreign policy must propagate in all circumstances. And having established that, we've seen how throughout the course of history, countries have based their foreign policy on ideology. When the United States of America went to Cold War based on its ideology of capitalism, We never ever said that the United States of America was in an illegitimate position to do that. Why was that? Because every country has a right to propagate its ideology. Every country, ladies and gentlemen, has a right to tell whatever it wants, and it should not be shy of this. And having understood that, the role of the internet is such, ladies and gentlemen, that it strikes a balance. We're not going to war. We're not going to kill innocent. We're not going to go on and kill every single individual, ladies and gentlemen. What we are doing is allowing people to communicate. If people want to start a rebellion, they should. In every country, ladies and gentlemen, this should occur, because if the people are being wrong, they have a right to challenge this. And let's understand how accountability will exist under our model. Now, according to the Arab Social Media of 2011, in its articles on the impact on Facebook and Twitter, there was a 33% increase on Facebook activity in Tunisia, 24% increase in Egypt, of all activity, ladies and gentlemen, spreading all around from 2011. There was also 700% increase in 7,000% increase in all activity, ladies and gentlemen, after Hootsuite, a proxy, allowed people to access. So what does this mean? That the allowance of internet allows people to share these opinions. If you don't allow this, ladies and gentlemen, you will have many innocents like Nida Agha Sultan, ladies and gentlemen, who would be killed by the government, who would be killed, and the government will hide this information because the people cannot know. And if the people, ladies and gentlemen, all around the world cannot stand a challenge against that government, this challenge will, ladies and gentlemen, not increase accountability. And accountability, ladies and gentlemen, is something that is becoming global. And internet is something that is global as well. If you agree with us, you should also understand that we need to stand against atrocities. Thank you.
For a foreign policy to be legitimate, does it also have to be efficient?
Not necessarily. We feel that countries have a right to propagate every single ideology, and that may be free interest. Even if it is not expected, does not mean that you don't take a stand altogether against such atrocities.
Okay, right. So, do oppressive regimes have an interest in keeping, their power?
Yes, but the people don't,
okay,
and we are standing for the people.
That's just a yes or no question. Thank you. So, if you provide people with tools to actually go against that power, are they more likely to violently crack down on their people?
The people in Egypt knew that the government will go ahead and kill its people, but the people still stood against the government. So even when the people know, ladies and gentlemen, that does not stop them from mobilizing against repressive regimes.
Thank you. You also talked about accountability. Do we, as the Western nations, also take accountability for the security of those people?
What you have to understand is that what we're talking about is the fact that these governments can now hide behind a cloak of veil of secrecy. When the internet allows every information to be shared, we now know as the international community what every government is doing.
So do you think that though in those countries, like without the internet or with their own tools, are they not able to protest against the government?
Not really. What we're saying is that the people may be protesting, but in our model, we're assisting the people in protesting. For example, in certain situations, people in China don't know about the Tiananmen Square massacre, so they cannot stand against the government. But when we actively circumvent this censorship, people have a reason to stand against the government.
So how exactly do you see this, foreign policy tool being used actively? Why does it have to be actively? Why can't it just be, a tool in a toolbox which we sometimes use?
Because people are not, we don't think it should be a tool in toolbox because people are being killed. We're going to do something about it.
Are people always being killed?
Not really, but that does not mean that the right to information is restricted from the people. People might not be getting killed, but that does not mean that you don't leave room for exploitation of people being killed in the future.
But when you provide an inefficient tool, right, then are more likely, more people going to be killed.
We don't see how this is an inefficient tool.
Oh, thanks.
We need time.
Yeah, thanks.
Ladies and gentlemen, we on the side of the opposition believe that in order for a foreign policy to be legitimate, it actually needs to bring some good, and this foreign policy brings none. In order to prove that, I will bring to you 4 points of rebuttal, and then I will talk to you about how this plan is going to undermine the opposition in oppressive regimes. Moving on to the rebuttal. The first thing that they talked about was that those countries are unjustly taking away the rights of their people, and that is a reason enough for us to invade their sovereignty. We think that this is completely false. We think that for the international community to actually work in a normal manner, we need to value sovereignty. We need to value the fact that we need to allow countries to decide on their own how they want to govern their people. And if a country should choose stability over liberty, if a country should choose to infringe on their people's rights on some matters so that their country can have stability and their country could have progress, they should have the right to do that, and we should have no right to intervene into that, because this is an infringement of their sovereignty, and this is a terrible thing to do, because we believe that countries have the responsibility and the possibility to choose how they want to govern their people on their own. Now, moving on to the second point of rebuttal. They talked about information, and they talked about how people will have access to it. The truth is, first of all, information is already spreading right now. Your plan is actually not going to change anything, because the fact is, in China, in Iran, people have access to information. They use proxy servers, they use alternative networks, they use all the things that you are trying to provide to them. They use it on their own because they are interested in these things. But the rest of the people, the majority of the people, are not using it, even though they do have the possibility to do so. Setting up a proxy server is actually really easy, but most people don't do that because they're afraid of their government tracking them down, because they're afraid that this is illegal, or because they're just not interested in politics at all. So the truth is, the same people are not going to use your proxy servers because they're still afraid of the government. They're still not interested in politics. And the thing is, you're still capable amount of people. You're catering to the people who already have access to everything, who already use proxy servers, and therefore the benefits, the people who you'll actually reach, is very marginal, if not completely non-existent. Now moving on to our third point of rebuttal. You talked about the internet as being a challenge for dictatorial regimes. We think that protests come without the internet, and protests come even in a censored internet, and protests come out of the small amount of people who use proxies right now. But if we are the one to impose progress, if we are the one to impose protest, that is actually going to undermine that protest and going to undermine that opposition. But I'm going to talk about that later. And now moving on to our fourth point of rebuttal. We think that they talked about every country has a right to propagate its own ideology. And we think that that is an actually very terrible precedent to say, thing to say. Because if you say that, you're saying that it is legitimate to bring out any foreign policy if it is for the case of propagating your ideology. No, that is absolutely false. In order for propagating ideology to be actually justified, every act needs to be thought through. You cannot just go around doing everything under the pretense of propagating your ideology. Not really. Because we have seen and we have condemned the USA for going into Iraq and Afghanistan. The world was enraged at them because they propagated their ideology without actually thinking it through. That is why we believe that these kind of things need to be thought through. Because if you don't, and if you're going to do something like this carelessly, you're actually setting the precedent that such an act is actually justified in all cases. We know that it seems really weird, but actually, the international community actually works like kindergarten. Oh, I can do it because they did it first, and that is why it's justified. Do we really want Russia to go around giving internet censorship to Georgia because they think that it is justified, and by saying that, oh, the USA did it, we can do it too? We cannot set that precedent. We cannot show to the world that this is actually a legitimate thing to do. We cannot show to the world that doing foreign policy without thinking it through is legitimate. Now moving on to our own argument about undermining the opposition. We think that when an opposition springs out in a situation where there is censorship circumvention, where there is a foreign power that is giving it this, we think that what it's actually going to bring is this opposition is going to be perceived as weapons of the US. They're going to be perceived as puppets of the West, even though that they are not this, even though that probably the change came from themselves, even though that it's not true, it is going to be perceived as such, and this is what matters, because China has huge control over their mainstream media. Therefore, China has a huge medium in which that they can actually influence the majority of their people. They can very easily portray these oppositions as tools of the West, and therefore make the majority of their population believe that this opposition is the enemy, and this opposition wants to destroy our country. Therefore, any opposition that's going to be springing up under their plan is going to be hated by the majority of the population. This is what we see in Russia. This is what we see how the Russian opposition is being perceived by the majority of the population because they are shown as that by the mainstream media. And we're giving them the chance to do that. Moreover, if this protest movement is going to spring up, the government is actually more incentivized to do more violent crackdowns on them because the government feels attacked. The government feels that the West is telling us how to do, and the West is telling our people how to behave, and therefore we're going to show the West that this is not right, and we're going to kill all of those protesters, and we're going to run them down with tanks, as has already happened. Therefore, in order for these people to actually bring about change, they need to bring that change about on their own and without our help. And therefore, I would beg to oppose.
Affirmative? Any time?
Yeah.
Is sovereignty absolute? No. So in certain situations, sovereignty can be infringed? That needs to be a very dire consequence. What would you classify as a dire consequence? We are talking about real crimes against humanity, you know. So real crimes of humanity, does that include picking up citizens and throwing them into prison for any anti-government sentiment? Well, that might. Right. Does sovereignty of a state mean that you can't undermine the writ of a state? Can you please repeat? Does upholding the sovereignty of a state mean that you can't undermine the writ of that state? You can undermine it only in very special cases. Okay. Are you okay with people using private proxies provided by people within their own country? Well, if these proxies work and they work to their benefit, of course. So you're not principally against it? Well, if it's one dissident giving a proxy to another, then we have no problem with that. Why? What's the difference? Well, because, you know, if it's a proxy set up by the Chinese government, then it's probably also censored. You said stability over liberty. Doesn't that also undermine stability in your opinion? Yeah, we do think that, you know, we as the West have no right to interfere in the cases where, you know, the crimes against those people are not that dire. But nevertheless, we think that, you know, generally we're kind of for Western ideas in these countries. We just don't think that we should be the one to impose them. All right. Do you believe that freedom of speech, expression, political association are ideologies held dear by most countries? Not necessarily. So they're not fundamental human rights? Well, that's arguable. Okay. What is your perception of stability? Stability, it can really depend when, well, for example, when a country's government doesn't change all that often, when the people feel that they don't have to live always in fear because something might change and something may turn around completely. And what if those people want to turn things around because the situation is really bad? Well, then they can. It's just that we're not the ones to impose them, because if we do, it's going to harm them. If we're not the ones to help them, but they can't help themselves, then what do? No, but they can help themselves. They do have proxy servers. They do have access to everything they want if they really try to, and it's actually pretty easy. Okay. Are you against foreign aid? No, because foreign aid is not... Why not? Because, you know, here is a situation where we're actually harming those people by putting them in danger. But foreign aid is, you know, giving food to starving people. That's different. And so the only problem you have is the practicality of it, despite the fact that you agree with local proxies. No, we have several problems with your case, but we think that if we're actually putting the people in danger and like incentivizing the government to kill them and do violent crackdowns on them, then obviously we have no point in doing this policy in the first place. Thank you.
That's a minute.
Half minute.
is up.
Another half.
Yes. That's literal.
How much time do we have left? Half.
You have 5 more minutes left after this. That's not happening.
Can you keep running the time? I need 15 seconds. Team opposition concedes to the fact that sovereignty is not absolute. In certain cases, when there's a crime against humanity, you can go and infringe the sovereignty of a country. They concede to the fact that picking people up randomly and throwing them to prisons is a crime against humanity. So in that case, you can infringe their sovereignty. So ethically speaking, our foreign policy tool is a legitimate foreign policy tool because they have no principal contention with that. The second thing, they're okay with people using proxies anyways. So they concede to the fact that principally it is okay for people to go against domestic laws. Now the only question we have is that what is the difference between Hotspot Shield providing those proxies and the government of another country? Because principally if you're conceding to these things, then what problem do you have? And this is where their case comes in. They believe that foreign policy is only legitimate when it is effective. We as the proposition told you that that is not the only criteria for a legitimate foreign policy tool. If it supports the morals and if it is morally and ethically sound and it supports the ideology of that particular country, which we outlined ideologies such as free speech, the freedom of expression, the ability to communicate, then it is actually legitimate. Effectiveness is secondary, and this is something that they haven't tackled. But we will tackle the point about effectiveness, and we will tackle them on several levels. Firstly, let's also, before I move on to tackling the case, let's point out to you that we also had an argument about how your people will hold these governments more accountable, how all these matters will be more transparent, and this is something that they have dropped and they have not tackled. The things that they have talked to you about. They talk about how you're unjustly taking away the rights of the people, and because the government is sovereign, it can do whatever it wants. They've already conceded to this in their cross-examination that this need is big enough to do away with this. Their second contention was that people already have access to this information and they don't use it because it is illegal, but some people do. They said that people aren't interested, and they said that people are afraid. So let us get this straight. In the Arab Spring, Gaddafi is killing hundreds of people, massacring them on the streets, and people aren't interested in what's going around. That is not what happens in these cases, ladies and gentlemen. We believe that people are interested in protecting their lives. They are interested in the way that the country is being run, and which is why they will use these proxies. They said that they already have access to this, so why should governments provide this? In certain cases, they might be shut down. In those cases, governments can provide this. So they can do this because it is a legitimate foreign policy tool. We're not saying that they absolutely must do this. Our burden is to show that they can do this, and we have already shown that. The third thing was that protests can come without the internet. So yes, we're not saying that the only reason why people protest in countries is because they have the internet. All we're saying is that this facilitates that. If you have a country in which you have 3 million people and they spread all around the country, the internet is an effective way of organizing protests. The internet is an effective way of communicating with one another and knowing where to come, when to come, and organizing these protests. And that is what makes these protests effective. Not the fact that you have 10 people scattered around the country protesting, the fact that you have 1,000 people in one place protesting. And that only comes with the internet. Their last point was about how every country has its own ideology, and if we're doing this, then we're setting a bad precedent. If the precedent that we're setting is that if human rights are being infringed in a certain country, then you need to help those people, then we're fine with that precedent, ladies and gentlemen. On the other hand, if the precedent that we're setting if the precedent that we're setting is that countries can support their own ideologies, then that is not a bad precedent, and that is one that has already been set in the real world. When you had in the Cold War Radio Free Europe, which gave all these, which gave talk shows about ideologies that the Western world believed and told people about those ideologies, then you didn't say that that was an illegitimate foreign policy tool because you believe that nations have a right to do this, and this is the same case. Within this point, they said that if countries do this without thinking it through, then it is wrong. We never said that they will do this without thinking it through. Countries and states are rational entities. They have to exist within the world. They have to coexist too. So they will be rational about this. The only thing that they talk about is about how it undermines protest and people are perceived as puppets of the West. We don't think that that is the case because all you're doing is you're giving them a way to communicate. On the other hand, they said that the majority of the people will hate these people. We don't think that the majority of your population will hate you if you rise against Gaddafi, ladies and gentlemen, because that is the right thing to do. People can make decisions for themselves. People know what is right and what is wrong. The last thing they said that if you have protests, then there will be crackdowns. And they directly link this to the internet. Now they never proved that if you don't have protests without the internet, there won't be crackdowns. Crackdowns will be there whether you use the internet or not, because crackdowns are there because of the fact that you are protesting. So if you protest, no matter whether you have the internet or not, there will still be crackdowns. So the problems that they outlined don't exist.
Thank you very much. That's a minute.
Yeah. Yes.
So anyone can spread any ideology.
Countries have a right to take measures which they believe that supports the ideologies that they believe in.
So you think that this is absolute, every country, any regime?
This right exists, yes.
So you think that if I happen to be, in Nazi Germany, I can kind of spread my ideology? That's acceptable?
There's a fine distinction between an ideology that actively kills other people and an ideology that only proliferates free speech.
Okay. What is the most important criteria in making a foreign policy legitimate?
We believe that first and foremost, your foreign policy should be one that supports your ideology and should be morally and ethically sound. And two, that it can or cannot be effective.
Okay. Why don't the majority of, if right now the majority of the Chinese population don't use proxies, even though it's really easy to set them up, if you don't need to be tech savvy, why would they use those proxies under your plan if they didn't use them before?
But people do still use those proxies, and in the case where those proxies that they do use right now are shut down, then it is okay for a government to go ahead and provide those same proxies.
Okay. Did the people of the Soviet Union hate their leader even though they cried when Stalin died?
I don't know.
Like what I meant to ask if a nation is living under like constant propaganda, do they really know what's best?
And as a global community, it is your job to tell them what is happening in the real world by providing them access to information.
Yes, but if they didn't use this information in the first place, even if they could, why would they use it now again?
Because now they have access to it.
Yeah, but if they had access to it before, but they chose not to use
But
it.
in most of the cases, they don't have access to it.
Yeah, like for example, I don't remember if it's correct, but I think it's like 600,000 people, Chinese people on Facebook, even though Facebook is blocked. So they clearly do have access to it. Why don't the rest use Facebook even though they can?
Can you please repeat the question?
Well, never mind, I actually asked that and you already answered. So, so if you think that there was no internet, would Gaddafi still be in power?
We don't think that the protests would have been as effective as they were. So there's a possibility he might have been in power, he might not have been in power. The protests certainly wouldn't have been as effective.
Okay, and how does the internet protect your life?
How does the internet protect your life? It gives you an avenue to communicate with other people, and if by communicating you can protest against an unfair ruler, an authoritarian ruler who is killing your people, who is killing you or your family members, then that can in the long shot protect your life.
Okay, thank you.
I guess I'll just roll.
How much time do we have?
You have 2 more minutes.
In order for a foreign policy tool to actually be considered, it actually has to bring good to the people it is implemented on and to the people, or to the country's residents who actually is providing the foreign policy tool. So we see that this harms both of the groups, whereas those people already have a lot of access, who want to have access to censored content, and therefore we don't see that this is justified. Now, first of all, they haven't brought us any extensions, and we're very glad that they have taken over our structure. So I'm going to move on by bringing you 3 points of rebuttal, then going to talk about our own argument, which is the Western agents. Now, first of all, they don't talk about sovereignty. Yes, we can see that sovereignty can be breached. Sovereignty can be breached, for example, if there is genocide or ethnical cleansing in some countries. We do see these are the legitimate reasons that in the past we have done it. But we must consider the fact that every foreign policy tool and actually implement implementing it has consequences. And so when those consequences are harmful for both sides, then it's not legitimate. We must also have an efficiency in case of considering any tool. Now, when they talked about Gaddafi killing people, that the people are now using internet to protect their life, and the fact that they won't be afraid of the illegality, we still haven't heard actually how those people are going to more use the internet, more getting access to the information, because they are afraid of the Gaddafi. They're afraid to go because they're afraid that even those proxy servers are going to be dangerous for them, and the government will get them. Because, for example, the project of Haystack, the technology, US confirmed that it's verified and we will implement it in Iran, and then it turned out to be the very best tool for the Iranian government to pinpoint the uses of that technology. So we say we are not able to provide them security that we promise. And if those people even are going to, based on the premise that the Western technology is the best, going to use that technology, then they're going to be they're still going to be persecuted and abducted, and their situation is going to be worse off. So we don't see it in any way a good plan. Now, and when we're talking about precedent, they say the president is helping people when their human rights are infringed. We say no. The president is actually having a tool in a toolbox for any regime. You're saying that it's not okay if Hitler does it? Yes, it is not okay that China oppresses its people, but it does oppress its people. So those countries that we don't deem to be making good decisions, we are telling them that this is a foreign policy tool that you can use. And furthermore, we are telling them we are coming against your regime because we're undermining your government authority and policy in the eyes of your citizens. They will be angered. They will start doing more cyber attacks as we have seen China do on the United States. For example, if the Iranian government is going to decide, I'm now going to develop my nuclear program because they don't like that the United States is not taking me into account when doing stuff in my country. We're saying that there are dire consequences, and those consequences all will also have an impact on the people in the United States, for example, or in the UK who is conducting this foreign policy, because those people will be in danger. And this is something that we also have to take into consideration when we talk about foreign policy tools and implementing them. And then they said we didn't, now moving on to our own argument about the Western agents, they said that we didn't tackle accountability. We didn't tackle it because we told you that there is not going to be any accountability, because majority of the people are going to turn against those people that are trying to spread something, to spread those values that we very much want to be spread in those countries. And because of that, because the majority will be against the opposition, the opposition will feel that the West is actually hampering my development in making this country, in succeeding in, putting a basis to human rights in my country. So those people will think, first of all, does it even matter what I do? Is the West right? Are the Western values the right values? Because the propaganda machine is going to tell the majority that no, this is brainwash, you shouldn't believe it, and those people that right now believe it and try to distribute it will also think, but what if the majority, what if the government is still right? And they're going to turn away from the Western values, and we will not see an inside movement towards any kind of Western values, human rights, and so forth. We say that the stability of those countries is actually in the mind of those people because they will be more cracked down on, as we can see what Lukashenko did in Belarus, for example, or as we can see what happened in Thailand with the red shirts uprising in 2010. We say there are plenty of examples where it doesn't work, that we just give them a tool and they just run into conducting change. It will get worse, they will suffer more, and we don't want that on those people. If there is change, it has to be natural, and for those reasons, I'm very glad to oppose this motion.
Is stability your main principle?
We're saying that it's a case-by-case basis, but in case
what is the case-by-case basis in which you will?
Stability, what we are standing for is the fact that in that country not more people will be killed. under with your plan, those people that are trying to rise up, the situation will worsen because they're not yet ready. They're just using the tool that you're providing.
All right. But you said that stability should be absolute. Every government has a right to have complete sovereignty. But then how can you be for a natural change that also goes against stability?
We're saying that the natural change won't be that worse because first of all, the people will be ready to conduct the change. They haven't just grabbed for the opportunity to use some tool and then head over heels gone into it. And secondly, we're saying that those governments won't be that violent because there won't be the Western agent in the equation.
Is one of the ways in which people get to protest communication?
It might be one.
It is, right? So when Egypt banned complete use of the internet in 2011, were protests as effective as they would have been if you had the internet?
I wouldn't know.
Alright, so if people can't communicate, protests won't be that effective because people don't know how to mobilize. When you give them a tool to communicate, won't people be mobilizing more effectively?
We're saying that just giving them the tool is not going
Alright, but the tool will allow them to communicate, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, exactly. So people will be getting an advantage of communicating with one another. Alright?
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
but it doesn't.
Thank you. Are you for asylum?
For asylum.
Do you support political asylum?
Well, you can conduct it if you are
Alright.
if
So
you consider all the risks.
Alright. So if there is a government, ladies and gentlemen, that goes against LGBT rights, you do allow political asylum, right?
Yeah.
And the principle is that a human right is being taken away.
Yeah, but that's
And in this
not
case,
the same.
in this case, a human right is also being taken away. Thus, you're infringing upon sovereignty. How is that so different?
It is different because we're endangering those people there. We're
So
taking
the
the
only
responsibility.
contention you have is that we're endangering people.
Yes, because the
Alright,
harm
alright.
with your plan is that great.
So people who want to protest will already protest. Yes.
Yes.
So how are we endangering people? How is there more danger to the people?
Because people will think that now that the West provides me the
That does not answer the question. All I'm asking is, does that endanger the people more?
Yes, it does. If it has to put.
Why does it endanger the people more? Because more people will protest?
I would have told you if you hadn't interrupted me. It is because right now the question is that if the West is the implementer, if the West is the provider, then their efforts will be undermined in those
Are you
countries.
for foreign aid of education? Do you support foreign aid pertaining to education?
Giving education?
Yeah. But the United States of America, for example, in another country.
Yeah, if it is run by the government.
Thank you so much.
You have 5 minutes left. I'll just.
Yeah, just keep writing.
Yeah, just-
Nida Agha Sultan, ladies and gentlemen, a 26-year-old Irani who was taking part in the Green Sea movement in 2009. She was killed by the Revolutionary Guard. The last few seconds of her life were filmed by a gentleman and put on YouTube. And that's how today, ladies and gentlemen, we know about what was done to her. But there may be countless other atrocities as well that we do not know about. And why, ladies and gentlemen? Because there are people out there who would support Team Negative's side. And that is what we're fundamentally against. And before we go on to distill this debate, let's just make a couple of things clear. Number one, Team Negative, most of the things they said were assumptions. They said, you know what, it's not going to work. Your policy is not going to work. Well, we have one thing to say to that, ladies and gentlemen. You don't know until you try. They support a world in which people would never have even thought about intervening in Rwanda. They support a world in which people would never have thought, let's go against Nazi Germany. You know why? Because we don't have any assurance that we're actually going to achieve something beneficial. The fact is, ladies and gentlemen, that today we have a moral stance. The moral stance that you should help people. And the fact is that while we do think, and while we have given you evidence, that evidence and examples of how that it has helped, the fact of the matter is, if we live in a world where people stop helping people because they're afraid, then the world is going to be a very, very dismal place. And that is not something that we support. Now, we're going to show you how Team Pakistan wins this debate by analysing two worlds. That of Team Estonia's world, and then that of ours. Now let's talk about Team Estonia's world first. The first thing that they talked about was sovereignty. They also conceded that sometimes sovereignty can be infringed, which is a principal concession. But they said then, well, you know what, only if there's genocide. So they're discriminating between how many people are being killed. They don't mind if 100 people are being killed, ladies and gentlemen, but if 1 million are being killed, then that's okay to intervene. Why are they not valuing the lives of even those 100 people? We believe that that is morally apprehensible. Even more, ladies and gentlemen, why are they not valuing the fact that those people's rights are being taken away, those people's fundamental human rights are being taken away? After all, the reason we're human beings is because we can exercise these rights. We're not programmed, ladies and gentlemen, we're not made to be drones. What makes us human beings is the fact that we can communicate with others, the fact that we can express ourselves. And if they're taking that away, we believe that's just as much as a reason to intervene as if 100 people are being killed or if 1 million people are being killed. But they actually are okay with that because in their first cross-examination they said fundamental human rights are arguable. We really, really strongly disagree with that. We believe that we live in the 21st century where you have certain rights that have been established for people, and that is today what Team Pakistan stands for, and that's what we're trying to show you through our world. And let's go on to what our world represents right now. We talked about having certain ideologies, and they tried to spin it off and say, well, Hitler had ideologies too. When we came up here, we defined a legitimate foreign policy tool as legitimate in the realm of geopolitics. That means it should be morally acceptable in today's world as well, ladies and gentlemen. And we don't really think that there are countries that have ideologies that promote genocide today anyway. And even disregarding all of that, we're talking about this debate. In this debate, we're promoting ideologies such as freedom of speech and freedom of expression, ladies and gentlemen. Did they ever contest that we're promoting those ideologies? No, they did not. And since they did not contest that, ladies and gentlemen, they understand that this is a legitimate foreign policy tool. They said that by providing our policy, all you're doing is endangering people. Let's get one thing straight. They are already endangered. At least in our world, you're giving them an opportunity to step out of that endangerment. What happens in their world? They're going to remain endangered, ladies and gentlemen. They're going to remain endangered because you know what? Fundamental human rights are arguable. We don't want that. We want to give them a chance. We want to give them the opportunity to step out of the dark era, ladies and gentlemen. And you know what? That's why we have an international community. That's why we have the responsibility to protect. When your government doesn't do it, then other governments can step in and help you out. That's why you have that's why you have things such as international forums as well, because you understand that governments today do not live in isolation. What they want is just a government to do whatever they want to their own people and nobody else to be able to step in and do something about it. But that's not what we support, and that's where our entire argument of accountability comes in, something that they completely dropped. They said, ladies and gentlemen, they just tried to shrug it off, but what we said is that it's very important for other countries, other governments that are in the place to do something, to be aware of atrocities that are being carried out. Lastly, they said that people may not want to use these technologies. Again, ladies and gentlemen, there's one simple answer. at least give them the chance, give them the opportunity to use these technologies. And well, we believe that people are not that brainwashed today. People still understand that they have certain rights in most countries as well. That's why in Egypt, ladies and gentlemen, they did use these technologies and they did try and push themselves out of the oppression that they were facing. And so, ladies and gentlemen, today we have proved to you why this is a legitimate foreign policy tool, why we stand on the moral side of this debate and the practical side of this debate, and for all those reasons, vote Pakistan.
You want minutes. And your time is up. Final
So right, ladies and gentlemen, Team Proposition tried to tell us that we do not stand for human rights. Oh please, we would gladly stand for those human rights if only their plan would be allowing those people to actually gain more of those human rights. But we do not believe that this is the case. We're talking about implementing a certain foreign policy tool here right now, right? And if that tool doesn't actually give those people more livable conditions or more, rights that they deserve, then we don't think that this foreign policy tool is actually something that we should be using. Right, so I'm going to take a step back and now look at what should be a foreign policy tool like, first of all, and then I'm going to analyze this debate also from the point of view of stakeholders such as the global community, oppressed people, and oppressed governments, right? Okay, so we told you about sovereignty. However, we did not really tell you that sovereignty is absolute. We do believe in its existence, though, and we do believe that for the global community to actually function, we need to have sovereignty in some cases, and we need to actually be aware of the fact that we cannot always infringe on our country's rights, or just sometimes always invade to it. And now, what we do believe first and foremost, right? Even if they say that sovereignty is not something that we should be advocating for, then efficiency is something that foreign policy tool. Efficiency is something that in foreign policy tools is firstly and foremostly the most important thing. Because if the foreign policy tool does not actually give what it's supposed to give, the values that we are standing for here, right, human rights and such, then this is actually not an efficient tool. Therefore, it doesn't matter whether it's infringing on sovereignty or not. It's not a foreign policy tool which is legitimate. Because legitimacy, in our opinion, stems from efficiency and whether or not it is actually capable of standing for the values that it is standing for, right? Now, when talking about stakeholders, global community, what we told you about were the precedents. We do believe that the global community kind of works like a kindergarten. If, the USA or UK to do something like this, implement this foreign policy tool, then why is it not okay for China to export their censorship tools in order to promote censorship or stability, right? In governments who also believe in stability over liberty. Why is it not okay? They never really told us that. And this is exactly what would be actually okay in the global community under their plan, because they would be setting a precedent and they would be telling all countries that it is okay to infringe upon the sovereignty of a country's internet, on a country's network system, right? So this means that we are probably going to also have more cyber attacks and such, because, basically if you tell a country that we are not happy with how you conduct your business, then it is more likely that they are also going to be infringing on our rights, and they are also going to be more aggressive towards that. But another thing that foreign policy actually has to be productive, but this is obviously what we've been talking about all the time. It is counterproductive, and counterproductivity is not something that we want from a foreign policy tool. And another stakeholder which is also counterproductive for is the oppressed people. It is counterproductive for them because they are already in a pretty bad situation. But what the government will want to do is actually hold on to their power. So therefore, it will be even worse for them. There are going to be more violent crackdowns. There are going to be even more censorship imposed on them because the government will be afraid of losing their power. So therefore, and in essence, when we're talking about accountability, then who is accountable for the security of those people in those countries? This is something that I brought out in the cross-examination, but they never answered that. Who is accountable for those people? Nobody is, and we are not going to be accountable for those people because we are so far away. We just think that, okay, we're going to send them some tools and they're going to solve their problems, but that is not the case. They are still going to be oppressed, and it's still going to be bad for them. Now, and another thing that when we're talking about oppressed people, revolutions have always happened, and they will probably always keep happening, right? Even before the internet, efficient revolutions could happen, and it doesn't mean that, if we take away the internet from people, that they will cease to happen. And now, when we're talking about oppressive governments, then by giving this tool to them, we are giving them the open chance, for example, for China, to show the open middle finger to the West by killing even more people, by saying that we are not okay with your policies and that we are actually very, very angry. And what we talk to you about is the fact that there's probably going to be more aggression, right? Once again, from those oppressive governments, like Iran could start putting more money into their nuclear program or whatever, and once again China making more cyber attacks. So in order to guarantee the safety of our own people, of the people in those countries, we need to stand for organic change and not just hasting them into something that they are not ready for and which they do not actually maybe want. So this is exactly why you should vote for Team Estonia. Thank you very much.
And the results will be announced tomorrow morning, so enjoy your